Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second Python Web Conference. I always seem to get either the first slot on the first day or the last slot on the last day. Major thanks to the awesome Sixies at 6 Feet Up for putting this thing together, for giving a little love to Python Web, a topic near and dear to my heart. Let's kick ass for 3 days. Let's be patient because they're launching what looks like a sexy platform for running conferences, which is direly needed. I'm sure they worked really late last night. Much love to the Sixies. Let's talk about what we're going to do today. We're going to do 3 hours of plowing as fast as you can possibly go through PyCharm power tips. The structure is going to be, we're going to do one section that is general tips and tricks, 42 of them. And then we're going to do one section that is about Django tips and tricks that we might increase or decrease the time on. Then we're going to do a final section where we go through PyTest and TDD applying some of those tips and tricks in real world coding. Let's have some fun. Let's work together on this. Don't wait till the end to ask any questions or anything. Just chirp up, either chirp up in Zoom, and I will turn my head to my other monitor really in a stupid way and look and answer your question, or chirp up in text in Loudswarm or in Slack, and Mary Beth will gather some questions and forward them to me. You're here to entertain me just as much as I'm here to entertain you. So ask some questions, throw me some curveballs. If you have a cool tip, share it. And let's see if I can perform it live with no preparation. Better not be about multiple cursors. I still haven't learned that. Let's talk about this first section. The 42 tips and tricks all have a repository that you can follow along and a playlist that has video, text, and code for each one of these tips. Let's talk about what that playlist looks like. Here is the workshop code. Here is the playlist. Each one of these has a write-up, and for example, the first one, Find Action, has a short video for Twitter, a write-up, and a longer narrated video from me explaining this. So if I go too fast, that's fine. You can go back and look at these later and see some more of the background information. With that in mind, let's begin. Each one of these tips has a file that goes with it, prefaced by what tip number it is. That's more for me than for you. We will start with Find Action. I say this all the time. I'm a man of a certain age. I can't be bothered. And actually, let me put this into full screen mode for right now. I'm a man of a certain age. I can't be bothered to remember 427 keyboard shortcuts. Instead, I remember one that leads me to all the others. For example, I want to find the string Mary in all the files in my project. What's the find and pass shortcut? Well, I've remembered that one. But what if I don't want to remember it? Who knows what it could be? Instead, I can click on a target and I can say Find Action. I can say
Paul, you are not sharing your screen.
Nope. All right.
Beautiful. There we go.
Good. All right. Sorry about that. So let me rewind a little bit. We have all of these tips are available in the URL that's pasted in the Slack channel. Each one of these, for example, the first one, Find Action, has a write-up, a short video, and then a long narrated video. So if we get too far ahead or you want to see more information about it, you can go back and find all of these tips in this thing called the PyCharm Guide, which has tips, tutorials, and other things organized by technologies and topics. And what I was saying before was, here, I have each one of these tips is in this repo, 42 workshop, has a file that goes with each tip, numbered by the tip. Help me remember where I am. Did I say that out loud? To help you with the organizing of the tips and a little bit of explanation. So back to this first tip. Apologies for not turning on the video. I can't remember every single one, so I will instead go to a target and I will invoke find action. And also I've installed and turned on a plugin called Presentation Assistant, which pops up at the bottom any keystrokes that I've done, showing the keystroke on Mac OS and showing the keystroke on Win Linux for the key map that I'm currently sitting on. So for example, find in path, I could type find in path, and then that would perform the action. I can also do a little bit of the speed typing thing where I type parts of the thing I'm looking for. For example, find in path, and this will invoke the action. It will also tell me what is the keyboard shortcut that will go directly to that action. So I invoke find and path. Let's see. All right, good. We're okay over there. And I can type Mary, and I could say in the entire project or in the directory that I'm sitting on, find and path on that directory, or the one above. And there I find some of the things. Okay, so with that in mind, I can also do things for find actions that are like preferences instead of actions. And I'll show you this one again later when I turn off tabs. All right, cool. Just checking over on the track stuff. All right, on to the next one, reducing clutter. This is one, it's early in the morning, or if you're in Europe, it's about time for happy hour. Take a deep breath. These next couple are going to put you into a different way of using the IDE. We're going to basically turn off all the IDE stuff so that it's not in your way. We are an IDE, but we can also give you a lean and mean UI by turning off a bunch of stuff. And I'm going to show you the way I work. So for example, I'm going to turn off a lot of this Chrome. This thing, I don't need it always on the screen. I will bring stuff up as I need it. This thing, the stuff around the side, etc. So the way I work is I turn off the toolbar. I turn off the navigation bar. I turn off the toolbar windows, the things on the left and the right and the bottom and stuff. I leave on the status bar, the thing at the bottom, because I use it a lot to get to my branches. And I will, for now, leave on the members and navigation bar, which gives me things like here, like little breadcrumbs as I go up and down the structure of a certain thing. So this gives me already, nope, I've got one more thing to turn off. Oh yeah, I'll get that in a second. This already gives me a little bit more of a leaner and meaner UI, a little bit more focused on code. How can I go a little bit further on that? So you see that we have tabs up here. Tabs are a very popular, common way of keeping your working set in front of you so that you can easily jump back and forth between things. But tabs kind of suck because they're keeping the entire working set right in your brain. What if you want to focus? Then you get so many tabs open that now you've got this other problem. Your solution has generated a problem. How do I sort through all my tabs and then I order my tabs and things like that? And I have to learn new self-defense skills about tabs. There are better ways to organize your working set and to move around in your code, in your flow, in your project. Better ways than tabs. So let's turn off tabs. One way to turn off tabs is kind of the manual way. I go into preferences and I'll show this. I'll go editor, general, editor, tabs, placement, none. So in preferences, I would go to editor, or I'll just say tabs, speed type down. And I can change the placement to put tabs somewhere else, or I can change it to none. And that's what I'm going to do, but I'm going to do it a different way with our friend from tip number 1, find action. Find action will find actions, but it will also let you directly manipulate settings. And so, for example, that setting for tab placement none, I could say tab placement none, and I hit enter, and I toggle the setting. And I hit enter, and I toggle the setting. And I hit enter, and I toggle the setting. And now my tabs are gone. I'm looking at one thing at a time. And when I want to move around in my working set, I will use different ways that we will talk about in the next 5 or so tips. All right, we're all good over here. All right, good. Now that we've done that, we're going to show a couple of things, and then we're going to show the last thing to kind of get into badass mode. But first, we got to learn some of these other ways to move around that don't involve using the mouse. The mouse is the enemy. We're going to keep our hands on the keyboard. The most popular way to move around from one file to another is Command-E recent files. Why is that? It lets you quickly move between all the files that you've opened, we'll say, recently. You could hit this toggle and only focus on things that you've been editing rather than things you've been viewing. So for example, when I bring this up, notice how it highlights not the first one, which is the thing I'm currently on, but the second one, which is the thing I was last on, which happens to be the most popular, frequent thing you're doing. I'm sitting on a file, and let's say the thing I was just on was the test, Command-E enter, and I flip back and forth between 2 files. And once you commit that to muscle memory, it becomes a very fast way to move around. But let's say that the thing that I want to go to isn't the one I was just on. And maybe I've got a long list of things here. Well, I can take my hand off, the worst thing, I can take my hand off the keyboard, come down and click on README, and then go back. Or I could use the cursor arrow, which is bad, but not quite as bad. Or if I'm sitting on here and I want find action, I can just start typing. Type part of whatever is on the screen, and it will filter the list of everything on the screen until it gets the thing matching, and it will also use that speed typing thing that I talked about earlier, and I can hit enter. So that recent files will cover 80% of your need for tabs. You're switching back and forth between things that you've been working on, and that's what people use tabs for. A slight variation of that, though, I turned off tabs, but I also turned off those things that let me get to all of the tools. For example, the terminal. Now, how can I get to the terminal now that I've turned the tool window off? I could go down here and bring it up through this, but I specifically turned that thing off. Instead, recent files also shows not just files, but the tools are in the left column. And so I can, if I want to go to the terminal, I can recent files, come over to terminal and click on it, or I can use my keyboard, left arrow down to get to it, or I can speed type, and this is the one that I do. If I want to open the terminal, it's recent files, terminal, enter, and there I am. Next up, we've been saying files. Files, 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 files. So for example, I've got at the root, I have a file in models.py, and it has a class called greeter in it. And I want to go to the greeter class in the file 42.models.py. I could have in my brain the concept of, okay, the greeter class is in this file, which is in this directory, and that directory is in this location. A lot to keep in my head, when really the file name is almost extraneous to what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the class greeter. Can I navigate by symbol rather than file name? And that is actually how I do all of my navigation, is with navigate by symbol. I type greeter and I hit enter, and it opens the file with the cursor on the declaration. I didn't have to go spelunking through some directory hierarchy with my mouse, taking my hand off the keyboard, hoping to remember the name of the file in the directory, the parent directory, to get to the class. That is by far the best way to move around. This works not just in your project files, but it also works in library code. And it also uses that speed typing camel hump kind of thing. So let's say I want to get the service registry in a package called Wired, which is installed in my dependencies. I camel hump type some of it, and it's going to go into my installed package called Wired, into a module called Container, and open the file and put my line on that class. Imagine the amount of work I would have had to do otherwise to get to it. I'm already bored. So that was a lot faster, a lot better of a way to do it. Back to where I was. I want to say something now. We have turned off the tabs. We've looked at recent files for moving around. We've looked at navigate by symbol. We can now do the last big thing. Dun, dun, dun. Turn off the directory tree. Files and directories are just an implementation detail. We're a freaking IDE, baby. We talk about symbols. The reason you pay the price for indexing is so that we can do the work for you. Put that indexing to work. Use symbols to move around in your code. All right. Now, I just turned off the project tool, which is how I'm going to remember what the hell the next tip is. So how do I get to the next tip? I can activate the navigation bar, Alt up, and I suddenly have this transient. It's easy. I hit escape, up, click anywhere else, it goes away. It shows up, it disappears, it's not permanent, it's not annoying, and I can go spelunking around in my directory tree to go find the next thing. I actually skipped over to activate nav bar. But for navigate file, I can then open that file even though I didn't have to use the mouse, I didn't have to use the project tool, whatever. So what if I actually do want to jump to a file? I've turned off the project tool. I don't want to use my mouse. I don't want to reopen it with Alt-1 and then close it again with Alt-1. I can, remember we index everything. We index file names as well and the path that they're in. So I can navigate to File. And you may see that these are all tabs on the same thing, which is Search Everything. Shift is Search Everything. I don't show it because I don't use it. Everyone else shows it because everyone else views this as the Uber thing. And you see some other editors that have this kind of command palette approach. Our answer for that is Shift. But I actually like to limit my universe. So I've memorized these three to get to them directly. So for example, if I want to jump to a file of 42.models.py, I want to jump to models.py in the 42 directory. I bring up the action for jump to file, and I don't have to type 42/models.py. I can type FOMO. And it found a path where stuff matched that, and I hit enter, and it puts me on the location, on my last location, the last time I visited that file. So for example, if I had that highlighted, and we'll say I close this, and I go jump to it, where do you think the cursor is going to be? Cursor is going to be, hey, look, it retained the highlighting too. So the selection, I should say. So you want to jump to a file, Command-Shift-O, find action, which is Control-Shift-N on Windows and Linux. All right, we're good. All right, I'll stop for a second and see, Mary Beth, we got anything?
I'm not seeing anything. I think you are okay to keep rolling unless anybody else on the Zoom has got some questions they want to chime in with.
So I will not ask you again. I will mention anybody on the Zoom, just freaking speak up. If you got a question, got a point, got a suggestion, want to challenge me on something, go right ahead. All right, we'll go on to the next one. Navigate cursor position back and forth. This is one that I use all the time also, because it takes about 2 seconds for me to remember what I was doing, for me to forget what I was doing. I joke that I have Alzheimer's, and when I go 2 or 3 files into chasing something, I'm down the rabbit hole and I can't remember how to get back to the surface. So for example, I'm doing some exploration. I've got some code here, and I got this thing called app. I'm not sure what it is. I mean, PyCharm, we'll see some tips later that will give us some help to poke at something. But I'm going to navigate to this thing using Command B to navigate the symbol. And then I'm going to land, let me see what the, and then service registry. Okay. So I'm sitting on this. I want to see what this is. So I go here. I'm like, okay, great. But really, this seems to be about the registry. What are you about? Okay, I see a constructor there, but it's got this thing called adapter registry and service container. What's that? All right, well, there's a cache involved. What's that? Wait, what was I doing? I've forgotten what I was doing. How do I get back to the top? I could do recent files. I got a lot to look at to get back to where I was. Instead, navigate up or navigate back. Navigate back. It's following all the clicks I did in all of the opens, navigate by symbol, that I did. Again, again, again. And now I'm back to where I was. I went exploring and I let the IDE remember my path for the exploration so that the IDE would get me back home. Well, let's say I get back home and I think, oh, wait, there was something at the end of that trail that seemed really important. Navigate forward. Well, re-follow your last navigation trail down to the end. And then you can navigate back up. All right, then this was the one that I was talking about activating the nav bar. We turned off the project tool window, the file system thingy. But sometimes, and we're trying to coach you, forget about files, forget about files, forget about files. But sometimes you need to think about files. Not enough to leave the window open all the time, but just sometimes. And you don't really want to open this thing and then switch over to your mouse to go dive around. What you prefer is that navigation bar, which is the thing that we turned off at the beginning. You would like the navigation bar to reappear, but only temporarily. And so I will activate it on the Mac. It's Alt up. And I said Alt home on there, but it's actually Alt up. And this gives me access to the navigation bar, and I can move around in it, and I can hit escape to dismiss it. This becomes pretty useful because I can now activate it, go left, go down, go up and up, go left again, go down into some other thing, etc. One little speed tip on it is the current directory is special. I don't have to, if I activate it and I want to see what's in the current directory, I don't have to hit left and then down. I can activate it and just hit down. So I will do that now and talk about opening a file with the navigation bar. We're going to move around and we're going to go to the test, we'll say. So I can activate the navigation bar. Remember, this is kind of the case where I'm not really sure the thing I'm looking for. If I know the thing I'm looking for, navigate by file, or even better, navigate by symbol. But this is like I'm poking around. Okay, I've got some tests. What were my tests? Have I written any tests? Oh yeah, there is this test directory. Oh, there's a test. Okay, I'll open that. So there are all my tests. And then I can navigate back to get to back to where I was. This is especially useful in the current directory scenario. I'm about to go to tip number 12. It will be on the Mac, Alt up, down arrow, enter. Is that right? Alt up, down arrow, enter. Alt up, down arrow, down one more, enter. We're confronted with a long list here. We talked before about survival tactics when faced with long lists in various places in the IDE. Here's one. If I want to go to 42, just start typing and I get 42. Even if it's out of view. Much better than scrolling or down arrow or something like that. All right, we're cool. Something else that I want to do that is file oriented, it's not a symbol or something like that, is create a new file. So for example, I want to make a to-do file in the root of the project. That's something that needs to have the file system. Again, I could activate this, go here, Command N, and then I got to close it. And all of that involved using the keyboard. Instead, I can activate the navigation bar, go up, up, and now do the same thing I would have done over there in the project tool, Command N. Create a new file, to-do.md. Hello. Oh no, the to-dos first. All right, cool. And then go back to where I was. You notice that there were other things besides creating a file that I can do when I select a target by navigating to it in the navigation bar. So for example, I can find in path. We did that in the very beginning. And so I'm going to go up to, we'll say here, I'm going to do Shift Command F, and I will do find in path. All without using the mouse, all without having to activate that project tool. What else can you do? I can refactor, rename something. I could refactor, rename the previous one, rename the file. Again, this is with it. Again, activate the navigation bar, go select something, and then the same thing I would have done with the mouse, with the project tool, I could do something like refactor, rename. Because I've selected something. Doesn't matter how I got to selecting it, I've selected it. I'm doing time. Oh, we're good. Add a new line before or after. Admittedly, this is a little bit of a newbie one, but then again, I get surprised sometimes by people who still make this mistake. Let's say that my cursor is right here and I want to add a new line. How often do you see people do this so that they get the indentation correct. Or perhaps worse, right there, right there, right there, right there, right there, right there. Much better way, start new line action, which is shift enter on all of them. Shift enter no matter where you are in the line. Shift enter starts a new line on the next line with the correct indentation. Very useful. What if I'm sitting here and I want to start a new line before? Control Alt Enter. Is that right? Control, no, Shift Alt Enter. Oh, that's on Windows Linux. Got that. Alt Command Enter does the same thing, except the line is ahead of instead of after where the current cursor is. We all have our things. That's my thing. I can easily remember that. Don't even think about it. This one, I don't know why, I still do this, up, over, enter. I still haven't yet committed my brain to that. Need to fix that. Make and extend a selection without using the mouse, keeping your hands on the keyboard. This is one that I've slowly started to, over the decades, convince my hands to do it correctly. So for example, let's say I want to take this line and move it out of the context manager. Because it doesn't really need to be in the context manager. It's always going to be Larry. There's no execution path that would change it to be different. So I could make and extend the selection. Actually, in this case, I could just move it up. We'll talk about that in a second. But let's say I wanted to take these two lines, or no, the whole block. We'll say the whole width. I want to take the whole width and move it out of the main. So to do that, Alt, hold down Alt and start hitting up arrow until you get the selection you want. You could keep going, you could keep going, you could keep going. And then you decide you went too far and you could go back, Alt down, Alt down. Okay, that's what I wanted. And then we'll see, I think this might be the next step. We'll go ahead and do it now. Then I can move this around. This is actually pretty smart because sometimes there will be an extra Alt up that will like get the decorator that goes with something. Move block, I just showed that. Reformat code. This is why you have an IDE. This is the kind of the price you pay for a lot of the power, put the power to use by letting it do the janitorial work for you. We will talk about that repeatedly. Let the IDE do the janitorial work for you. We have 3 warnings in this code. And we can see that we got a warning, and a warning. Or I can mouse over this and it will say that I've got warnings. I want to fix these warnings. Well, I could put my cursor here, hit enter twice. And I could go here and hit backspace 5 times. I could go here and hit enter once. Or instead, I can invoke reformat code on the Mac, Command Alt L, on Windows and Linux, Control Alt L. Keep an eye on it. I'll say 3, 2, 1, go. And watch what happens. 3, 2, 1, go. I'll put it back. 3, 2, 1, go. It got me kind of PEP 8 compliant with 1 keystroke. Probably finding things I wouldn't have found myself. And all in a way that's configurable in settings. Under code style, different languages like Python, tabs for all kinds of things, different spacing, and blah, blah, blah. This is one of those things. Sometimes when I'm thinking about a problem, I'll just sit here and do this a couple of times just to distract my brain. That and optimize imports, which I believe is the next one. This really is one to let your IDE do the cleanup on aisle 5. Let it do the janitorial work for you. Life is too short to manually garden your imports. So for example, I've got some problems in this code. I have an unused import, and PyCharm's yelling at me about that. Or it's also yelling at me here about it. I also have these other problems which are style related. I have an unsorted list of imports. Sys should be before time. And I have a policy in this project that we shouldn't do 2 imports from the same package on the same line. We should split these across 2. So I'm going to let the IDE do my cleanup for me with optimized imports. And this is the key binding for the action optimize imports. So I'm going to do, this is another one. I'll sit here and do this 10 times while I'm trying to think of what problem I was trying to solve. Optimize imports did the sorting, and it got rid of that unused import. Let's talk about that third one, splitting this across multiple lines. So if I go back to imports, back to code style in the settings, and I'm in the Python code style. These are my settings for PyCharm. I click on imports. And then I get this little section of the settings, and I can say always split imports. And now when I reformat the code, watch what happens. It split them, alphabetized them, etc. Again, undo, optimize imports. There's a variation of this that is significantly better. All right. On to generate imports. This is even better. This is the way you should try to get yourself to work in the future. I don't see enough people doing it this way. So please pay attention on this one. Think about it and decide, is this the way I would like to work? Usually when it's time for me to import something, so for example, I'm going to change this code. Instead of hardwiring it to Larry, I want to use random.choice to get a random choice of customers. Ordinarily, what I would do is I would say, okay, I want to use choice. Oh, crap. Okay, where do I put the imports? What's my policy? Do I put it before this? Wait, no, okay. My policy is, I think it's the PEP, maybe it isn't. All the ones from Python go in there. Yeah, that's it. All the ones from Python go into their own group. So I will do from, no, it's from random import choice. Okay, that was easy. Phew. And then I reformat my code. And then where was I? Okay. Oh yeah, here's where I was. Forget all of that. All of that is janitorial work, clean up on aisle 5. The IDE can do the work for you. Instead, you could type choice and do Alt-Enter and say to the IDE, hey, IDE, will you import this name for me from the correct location and put it in the right place and obey all the PEP 8 style guides that I've got set in my IDE? Why, yes, I will do that for you. And then everything looks good. And then I can do an undo, go back to the way it was. I can go even one step further and not finish the typing and do Control space and get some choices. And now I don't even have to do the Alt-Enter. I don't have to finish typing, because if I finish typing, I'll probably put a typo and I'll put choisi. Instead, I let the IDE do the completion and generate the import for me in one statement, in one kind of gesture. All right. Install and import. There's like layers of this import and packaging stuff, and heads up, more cool things coming in upcoming PyCharm releases on this. Let's say that I'm working on a package and I've got a warning because I want to use the package from PyPI from the warehouse called Maya, which is date times for humans, but I haven't installed it. And PyCharm is yelling at me saying, first it's yelling at me because I haven't imported it. So I'm going to go through this sequence of getting it in the right shape. First one is, do you want to install, but look, import. It's going to generate the import, but it's offering to do something else, import and install. Why, yes, PyCharm, I'd like you to do that work for me. How much time did you just save me by doing this? So down here, it's telling me that it's doing the equivalent of pip in the background. It's installing the package. Come on, pip. All right, so pip has completed its work. We do this thing. I need to talk to the folks about this, this extra Esmaya thing, but I'll remove that. And one other thing that we can do is, let me see if I've got it. All right. Good. So we now have our package installed and imported for us. We will continue on to adding fields. This is a tip, kind of leaving some of that packaging stuff. I'm writing a class. And in Python, you've got a constructor called dunder_init that you pass arguments to. And then you want those arguments maybe renamed or calculated or something, and then stored on the instance. So for example, I want to pass in an argument name and store it on the instance as self.first_name. Here's how I would have to do it. I would have to say name, and then I would come down and I would say self.first_name equal name. Well, that's a little bit of boilerplate, a little bit of repetitive typing. The IDE can help you a little bit on this by saying name and then Alt-Enter. All right, I've gotten myself into a bad state on this. I'll skip it, maybe come back to this one later. Ordinarily, what would happen is Alt-Enter would give us a chance to add this as a field. All right, on to the next one. This is one of the ones that really, where the IDE does really shows its value for eliminating work, eliminating errors, things like that. So for example, I'm in a project and I want to change my name on a file. So for example, models.py, you know, models.py actually has one file in it. So plural might not make sense. Maybe it should just be model.py. But then I think about it, how many places is that used? So for example, if I went over here and I did find usages, oh, wow, that's a lot of work. And maybe after I looked at all of that, I would forget that it was actually in the tests as well. Now I would do this rename and I would break something. I would break an import and leave it as models.py, maybe ship it, maybe commit to master, do something, and not even realize that one of my imports was broken. Instead, let the IDE do the work for you. Multiple ways to do this. For example, I can activate the nav bar. I can go to models.py and do refactor rename. And I will change this to model.py. And it will rename it. So for example, if I come to here, I'll use my cursor temporarily, we see the name was actually changed. If I reset files and go to it, it shows up as model.py in recent files. It was renamed. If I alt up here, it tells me it was renamed. If I go to some other thing, well, for example, where I just was, my import renamed the import. And all the other places that it was used, maybe in the next one? Yes. All of these files, it was renamed. For example, if I go to the commit window, I see I just changed 27 files. But what if I'm there and I think, wait a second, I just renamed a file and it's singular now, but I'm probably going to add another model in there and then it's going to be models again. I want to undo. Oh man, will I ever remember all those changes I just made? And I got to change it in Git and all these other things. I'll sure to forget something. Maybe I'll just leave it the way it is. No. Let the IDE do it for you. Undo will remember that entire refactoring and all of the actions taken in that refactoring as one editor transaction and put everything back the way it was. All the imports, the name of the file on disk, all those kinds of things. If you have multiple models.py, they're not obviously going to be in the same package in the same directory, right? This is an important point. We rename symbols, not strings. And so we know the difference between 42.models and possibly 43.models. And we will rename 42.models without messing up other models. Mohammed, does that answer the question? You might be a little bit behind. Let me know in Slack if that didn't answer the question. I'll come back to it. But the point being, you can have models.py all over the place in different directories. We will refactor, rename the one and only one that you were sitting on. Okay, onward. Rename file. We can also do other kinds of refactorings, lots and lots of refactorings. So for example, we can rename symbols, not just files. So for example, greeter is used in a lot of places. Maybe we want to make it a little nicer and say welcomer. I could go visit all those places, probably forget something, probably break my code. Or I could let the IDE do the cleanup on aisle 5, the janitorial work, and do my renaming for me. For example, greeter, I could navigate to it, and I could refactor, rename, and say welcomer. Hit enter. And now, my code that used it, that imported it, got its name changed. Now down here, after the import, the usage of it, it got its name changed. Lots of other places got its name changed. And that's pretty good. What if I change my mind? Undo. Takes the entire transaction, every action in the renaming, puts it back the way it was. When I just did that refactor rename, I went to the symbol, to the declaration, and did the refactor rename from there. I could also refactor rename from one of the many usages of that symbol. I could do rename welcomer. And now when I navigate to it, the declaration was changed. And again, I can undo all of that as one transaction. That's because we work on symbols, not strings. And as another example, we could have something that had the word greeter in it, but we wouldn't touch that because it's not that symbol, that Python symbol. All right, quick documentation. Lots of things that we do are designed to keep you in the flow, so to speak. We don't want you to have to stop what you're doing, go to a browser, and go figure out what some Python function does. So for example, I'm sitting on choice, but it's got some parameters, you know. I don't really know what this thing does. I can, instead of having to go to the browser, I can do F1 and get an inline overlay that gives me the doc string, the arguments and stuff like that. And I could actually click on it and go to my browser for that documentation. All right, good. So inline documentation is another very useful thing. It's also a good reason for putting doc strings in code that you write primarily for yourself, so that you can help your future self remember what things are without having to change your context, go over to it, read about it. All right. Similarly, maybe I know what choices is, but damn if I didn't use choices instead of choice, which is this weirdo statistical thingy, blah, blah, blah. So I mentioned before F1, but I can also just hover over something and get an inline overlay that gives me some of the information about the thing that I'm looking at, etc. But if I'm sitting in here, I want to know what are the parameters. I could go stop what I'm doing, break my flow, or I can bring up the parameter info. And as I type in things, it will move the bolding to the current parameter. And if I move my cursor back to here, it will put the bolding on the current parameter. I'll speed up a little bit. Running things from the keyboard. I turned off the thing that would have normally been up here for running code. How do I run some code? If I've got this little run block thingy, then I can click here and I can run it. And it will generate a temporary run configuration that has my running. And if I want to rerun it, I can, now that it is the active run configuration, I can hit Control R and rerun it. If I want to see all of my run configurations, I can do Control Alt R and get all of the active run configurations, do speed typing, or even right cursor and go into debug or edit the configuration or whatever. All right, turn that off. Debugging, a tip about debugging, our debugger is awesome because Lisa is awesome and she manages our debugger. Let's say that I want to stop execution, but only in a certain case. I'm going to be in this for loop. I don't want to have to over and over and over keep hitting. In fact, I'll show it. I'm going to set a breakpoint on, let's see, this line. I'm going to run this under the debugger. I want to stop when it's Larry. Oh, actually, I should have put the breakpoint here. Yep. I want to stop when it's Larry, but it's not Larry, it's Sam. So I'll continue. But it's not Larry, it's Juanita. So I'll continue. And it's not Larry. This is getting old. Oh, finally, it's Larry. What if I want to do all of this, but only stop when it's Larry? I can right click on the breakpoint and I can say when customer, and look, I get autocomplete. Now, when I run under the debugger, it will go and go and go and go and go until it's Larry. This time it happened to be on the first one. Let's see if I do it again. This time it was on the third one. This time it's on the third one. This time it would have taken me 9 times to get there this time. Conditional breakpoints, pretty cool. Oh, yes, Jeremy, conditional breakpoints are pretty cool. If you have any suggestions on what you would like about that, type it into Slack. We've got some of the developers that are hanging out here too. Evaluate expression. When you're in the middle of stopped at a breakpoint, you're poking around. You're trying to figure something out in a specific scope. What you can do is, let's say I put a breakpoint. I'll put a breakpoint on this line. I want to understand a little bit more about what's going on here. So I'm going to run the code under the debugger. I will also point out that I could also right click anywhere in here and debug. It's going to stop on that line and I'm like, what is this really doing? So I will highlight that code. I'll right click on it, evaluate expression. It saved me the typing. I could have just done. When I hit enter, it will evaluate it. This didn't work because I haven't gotten the customer yet. Is that right? Customers. There, and I can evaluate it again and keep evaluating it. And now I'm like, oh, that's what that code was doing. Great, got it. Thanks, PyCharm. You're a big help. On to the next one. I turned off tabs, but maybe I want to see two things at once. And this is TDD mode for me. I want my code that I'm working on the left. I want my tests on the right. And I want my test runner output at the bottom. So let's show that in this example. I'm going to bring up the actions. I'm going to say split vertically. And this isn't tabs. This is just splitting into two kind of frame thingies. Split vertically. And my code would be on this side. And I'm going to go over to the other side and I'm going to open test. What did I call that thing? All right, good. And now I'm in kind of TDD mode, and this is for 30. So I'm going to go down to 30. I'm going to run my tests just for that one test, and I get the test output at the bottom. Code that I'm working on the left, test for that code on the right, test runner output at the bottom. When I'm on my really wide screen, I take the test runner output and put it on the right. When I'm on two screens, I take this entire window, detach it, and put it on the other screen. But all of these kind of let me focus on code and test, code and test. All right, let's see. Am I going to continue? Yep, I just did run single test. One more thing I can do is auto run tests. So for example, I'm now on 32. And so I can run that test. But I can get into kind of TDD mode, where I've got it laid out correctly, and I'm executing tests as I type using a configurable delay. By default, it's 3 seconds. And so, for example, if I returned greeting as a string, I'm not even going to save. My hands are away from the keyboard, and my test ran. And I'm going to put this back, hands away from the keyboard, not even going to save. 3 seconds later, my test passed. This, for me, is a really good way to avoid the tragic consequences of doing too much work at once in some unrelated test breaks, and I have to reconstruct the madness. Yes, Jeremy brought up about the debugger and evaluate expression. I think I will show that. So let me unsplit. First confirm. Let's say I run this code under the debugger, and I'm in test, 33? And I'm going to put this here, and I'm going to run this test. I'm going to run this test under the debugger. And I do this evaluate expression thing. You know, I do this, and I say evaluate expression, and I evaluate it, and it's true. But that evaluate expression thing might be a little clumsy for people to use. Maybe they're more used to using like the IPython stuff. And so we can drop you into a terminal whether it's in the test runner or whatever, and you can use the IPython terminal. Let me get the test runner out of the way and just use the regular debugger. I will start here. And so, for example, I can go to the console, and this doesn't have IPython installed. If I had IPython installed, it would automatically use it. But I can do x equal 1, y equal 2, x plus y, greeter, have access to all my symbols, have access to autocomplete, whatever, with what feels like the REPL instead of that evaluate expression as an alternative to REPL. Jeremy, is that cool? Instead of typing, you can speak up as well. Yes, switching from right code to left without the mouse. So I'm in TDD mode. Test under 33 is wanting to work on the code for 33. So I'm sitting here. Instead of going to main with my mouse, I can instead Alt-Tab to cycle between splitters. Cycle to the last cursor position between splitters. All right, cool. Coverage. This is one that is a PyCharm professional feature. We really got to start, as a community, we got to start educating people on use the debugger, actually. Too many people are still using print statements. We got to educate people on testing and making that a more joyful way to work on your code, and making coverage more joyful. So for example, I can run these tests and they run fine, but I'd like to see what the coverage is. I can instead run it with coverage, run just this one test with coverage. It's going to crank up. It's doing the coverage stuff now, and it's going to let me dive through my code and see how well my test did the coverage. And for that one file, 76% of the lines were covered. That's not too bad. I don't even have to do this diving down thing, because look in the gutter tells me that this is the thing that got no coverage, because the execution path never went through foo. Next. I'm doing it right on time. The one that every time we talk about this on Twitter, and Nafiel can confirm, Nafiel's the other PyCharm developer advocate. Every time we talk about this, we get people tweeting like, oh my God, this saved my beep just today. You can use version control to save you from disaster. It's not always going to save you from disaster, because you might make a change within the boundary of a commit and then lose it because of something else. Going back to the commit won't save you, because you'll lose that work that you did. Or maybe you didn't even put it under version control. So for example, we're going to use the built-in history to recover from a mistake. I'm going to unsplit, get out of TDD mode, and I did close the coverage suite. And let's say I'm like, okay, yeah, main, blah, blah, blah. I just, delete it, whatever. And then 2 days later, I come back and see, oh my God, why is this code not running? What, did I delete something? What went wrong? What you can do is show history, or right click and go to local history, show history. And it has essentially, for everything in the system, each editor transaction as a separate entry. And you can see right here, it used to be like this. Now it's like that. And we did this at 10:05 a.m. today. And all I have to do, I've got this kind of diff style layout, click here, it puts it back the way it was. I can go back further in time. We have some kind of algorithm for not storing everything in the universe, but generally local history will have the thing that you're looking for. It will even do something like save you from this. Let's say I'm not going to save delete it. Yeah, well. So I deleted a file, not just a change in a file. Will local history save me on that? Yes, it will. I can go to the container and do local history there. And it will show me the deletion of a file, and I can revert it, and it will put the file back. And the file is back. And that's really handy because that's another one that VCS might not have saved you on because you might not have put it into VCS yet. Local history. Whew. All right. Creating a project, we wander around GitHub and you find something that you want to work on, or you got one of your own projects that you haven't cloned recently, you threw it out or something like that. We can go to VCS and we can go to Git, check out from version or get from version control and bring up this window. We can also do it from an action. We renamed it. Yep, get from version control. It's the same path as using the menu, but we didn't have to use the mouse. And we can paste in a repository URL, or we have GitHub integration. So I come here and I just start typing like Django. Oh yeah, I've got a repo on GitHub that we're going to look at in just a second called Django tutorial. Or I could have done the 42 workshop that we're currently sitting on. Or I could do the Lax League that we're going to work on in the third segment. We have a number of things about comparing from branch to branch. And we have something that just landed. This is for the question Joe just asked. We have something that just landed in 2020.2 EAPs to improve the UI for comparing one branch to another. This project that I have doesn't have branches in it, so I can't easily show it. Feel free to follow up with me in the hall track after. All right, so that lets us create a project from GitHub, and then it will do a lot of the things like look at creating a virtual environment and let you install things from requirements.txt, stuff like that. Put something under version control. I'll skip that because this one's already under version control, but it's pretty easy to enable version control. Yeah, since this one is already under version control, that won't work. Reword commit messages. Gradually, I'm forgetting how to use get from the command line because this is so much easier. But let's say that you haven't pushed yet and you do a commit with a typo. So for example, I say commit, and I say clean things up. And just as I click commit, I'm like, no, that was wrong. What do I do now? I can go to the get tool window. No. Get tool window. And I'll put that back at the bottom too. I can find that commit under the log. I can right click on that commit, edit the commit message. And if I haven't pushed yet, clean up that commit message. Also, let's say that I'm working on it and that whole thing was a mistake. I shouldn't have committed it. I wasn't done yet. I can right click on it and I can say undo commit. I could put it in one of our things called change lists, or I could put it back into the default change list. Everything's back the way it was. We also have the ability to amend a commit. So for example, I go ahead and I do the commit again. And then I realize that I've got some other change that has to go in. And I go to do the commit. I could amend and it will put it into the commit that I was just on. We also have support for partial commits. Let's say that I put a comment under main. This is important. And then I edit this line. And I go to a commit and I want to, I'm looking at this and I want to commit some of it, but not all of it. I got my windows messed up. So I'm looking at this diff and I'm looking at the changes that are on it. And I see this line was changed, this line was changed. And I'm not ready yet for this, but I will keep that. And then that lets me commit part of a commit. You see that the dash there. I can then turn off some other things, turn on some other things as far as what goes into the commit. Running NPM scripts, if you're doing a project that is like full stack and it's got some JavaScript stuff in the front end, like this package, this one does. So here I have a package.json file. Package.json file has a script in it. I can run this script several different ways. I could go to this, right click on it and say show NPM scripts and keep this little tool window open all the time, which I don't want to do. Or I can open up this file and I could click right here and run it. And so my NPM scripts are running in a special NPM script tool window and I can close it. We also have like run anything support that could skip this intermediate step of the package.json and go directly to the serve. I want to switch over into some HTML development, which uses PyCharm Professional because that bundles WebStorm, our IDE for web stuff. Let's say, you know, front-end stuff, you're always wrapping stuff with divs to put it in a container or column or notification box or something like that. And let's say this span, we want to put it into a div. So I will click somewhere in here and I will extend the selection. This is a tip that we looked at earlier, Alt up. And once I get there, I will do surround with, or even better, you see the keystroke sequence there. So I will use that keystroke sequence, Alt-Command-T, and I'm going to surround it with a div. And it's got the red box because it's going to prompt me to finish it. And when I hit enter, it will generate the other side of that. Or even better, I will make my selection again. I'm going to surround with Everitt. And I'm going to say div.container using the Everitt system, and it will make a div with a class name equal to container. Everitt's pretty cool. Tip number 42, and then we'll take a little bit of a break. I just mentioned that we bundle WebStorm, which is our IDE for web stuff. I'm the developer advocate for PyCharm and for WebStorm because I'm a web guy. And WebStorm is so great. Well, DataGrip, our IDE for SQL, is great too. Let's take a look at how great At the root, I've got this thing called a sample under db.sqlite. It's a SQLite file. And if I double click on it, I open the database tool in PyCharm, and it creates a connection to the database. And I can walk through the schemas, go up to a table called models, double click on it, and browse stuff in there. And I can edit stuff in there, and I can issue queries in there, and do a whole bunch of other things that are really cool and amazing. All right, that is my 42 tips. I will pause here, see if we have any questions. Turn on your audio. See if you've got questions that you want to ask by talking, or any comments.
Feel free to also join the gallery if you're just watching in Loudswarm right now. That way you can actually talk to Paul and he can hear you as well. Yep. I will put that link in track too, just in case.
Mary Beth, we'll pause for a couple of seconds. And if nobody has anything, we'll take a quick 5-minute break.
Sounds good. Also join the gallery if you're just watching in Loudswarm right now. That way you can actually talk to Paul and he can hear you as well. I will put that link.
Yes, Data Grip does come bundled with PyCharm Professional. We're going to be producing some material that talks about that integration. We meaning Nafu. All right, Mary Beth, we'll take a 5-minute break and resume at 10:23 Eastern.
Sounds great. I will leave the stream running for anybody just joining on. So if you have any questions, feel free to let me know, but we will kick back Paul's talk in about 5 minutes.
All right, I'll get some water. let me take a look at my key binding scheme, my key map. I'm using one based on the Mac OS. I shouldn't even be using, I'll just switch back to Mac OS. I think that was demo leftover. Mohammed brings up a point about being really strict about cutting the mouse cord. We have a plugin called Key Promoter X. Let me bring that up. For those of you who need, shall I say, a little more prompting and pushing and nudging to keep your hands off the mouse. This is a plugin which each time you use the mouse, it will tell you, like, look at that. It will tell you, hey, you know, dummy, you could have done this. Not only will it do that, it will remember all the things you've been doing and kind of grade you and say, oh, well, you know, look, like right there. Here's the ones you missed. You could have done better. If Mohammed, if what you're looking for is a boot camp for your hands, then Key Promoter X is the thing that you want. Mohammed, does that, oh, I'll type it. All right, after I answer this last question, I'll get going again. Okay, yes. All right, so. All right, let's begin again. We're going to do the Django tips. We won't do all 20 because I need to speed up a little bit. Like the previous session that we just did, a lot of this material is available online already. For example, the repo I'm going to be using is the end of the official Django tutorial, which I committed to here. And the material for it corresponds to a playlist in, oh no, that is not correct. I'm going to take that out. We have videos for these, but we still need to finish publishing them. But anyway, let's follow along on what we're going to be doing. This series of Django, oh, thanks Ernst for taking care of that. Cool. All right. This falls on a little bit to the one we just talked about. It presumes that you've done some of the things like getting your IDE set up. I failed to mention that my IDE was set up in the Darkula theme. So for example, I have under appearance, I'm using Darkula, the out-of-the-box dark theme. I'm also setting for that color scheme, I'm using the JetBrains mono font at 17 so that it looks good on a 720p display. I've also enabled font ligatures so that you get those cool looking things like that symbol and stuff. Thanks, Ernst. Ernst is the product marketing manager for PyCharm. Okay. The other things that we did involve turning off tabs and stuff like that, so I don't have to show that as much. We're talking about Django. We're talking about web stuff and getting a project started. All of our Django support is in PyCharm Professional. And one of the things PyCharm Professional makes it easy to start a new Django project by File, New Project, Django. You fill something in. You accept the defaults on the virtual environment. And so for example, my policy is to store the virtual environment inside each project the way God intended. And all of you who think your virtual environment should be stored centrally under your home directory are wrong, thus ensuring that I get a lot of hate mail. But if you are one of the heathens who store your virtual environments under your home directory, we will remember that, and all of your future projects will be stored with that policy. You can either with create new project, you can say, make a new virtual env, use an existing one, some other settings that we can do. These other settings are about Django, things like template languages and stuff like that. I don't need to create a project because I already have a checkout. How did I get that checkout? I did, I've got to go to the Zoom window in my way. I use the same thing that I showed previously to clone a project from GitHub. So those are the different ways to get started with a project in Django. Once you get started with a project in Django, if you open something that already has Django in it, we will do this for you, but you might have to manually do it yourself. We will set the languages and frameworks and Django to enable Django support. And here's where you can set some preferences for what that support might mean. All right, now onward, we can begin. The first tip is that we understand Django stuff. So for example, you're in settings.py and you've got this thing called installed apps. Well, this is a string, right? Oh, I started a fight in the Slack channel. All right, excellent. These are strings. They're not symbols. But we have special Django support, so we can interpret these strings as symbols that are meaningful in the context of Django. So for example, I can get autocomplete on the apps that were registered for the polls thing. And I can also navigate to that as well, just as if it was a standalone kind of symbol. I can also move around and do all the think in terms of symbols, not in terms of strings, to show my next tip, which is about generating dependency diagrams. So I want to go to the choice model. Polls have questions, questions have choices. I want to go to choice. I'm going to use navigate by symbol to go to choice. And it's in the polls application and in the models file in polls. I'll jump directly to it. My cursor's now sitting on this model, and I want to generate a visual, cool looking dependency diagram that shows me what my tables and structure looks like. I can do that by find action, and I can do show diagram. There's the keyboard shortcut for it. That's why I'm using find action. I'm not going to remember that. Hit enter. What kind of diagram do I want? I want a Django model dependency diagram. And for choice, it generates this diagram with all these little controls that I can do, showing the cardinality, blah, blah, blah. People love that. All right, so that's the first, well, I'll say the second tip after the installed apps thing. That's the second tip, dependency diagrams. We also have manage.py as a custom tool, something that gets a UI on it. We are an IDE. The I stands for integrated. We bring things into our UI and apply all the conventions that let you jump around from one place to another, so that when you know one thing, it will help you know another thing, because they have consistency in the visual UI. And so manage.py is something that people do a lot in a Django project. Our Django integration has a custom tool for manage.py, and I can get to it with actions, manage.py, bring it up. It just loaded everything that was known in this project and gives me a tool window at the bottom. So for example, let's say that my question model in its question text, I want to change it to 300. Well, that's changing the DDL and the schema and all that stuff in my database. Now that means I need to do a migration. So I can type, watch this. Ah, autocomplete, cool, yay. How about this, autocomplete? Yay, autocomplete, cool. And I can hit enter, and it will do my migration for me. It will tell me that this happened up here. I will know that the migration worked correctly because I'll bring up this. I see that I have a new migrations in Git. Something changed, and those were the changes. It's actually completely new migration. And what I can then do, I'll go ahead and get out of this. I will go back to VCS and put myself back the way that I was by rolling back. Yeah, I'll roll back all of those. All right. And so that is our manage.py support, giving the autocomplete for the extra things that are possible in your project based on your registrations and stuff like that. You know what? I came to PyCharm from Emacs as well. The thing that made me move, of all things, was indenting JavaScript. No amount of eLisp that any human could ever write would ever actually get jQuery to indent correctly. Of all the things. Oh, and the other thing was good tabs, because Komodo didn't have good tabs. And now I teach people to turn off tabs. The irony. Navigate view to template. We understand views, we understand templates, we understand the structure of Django projects. The things that you do a lot, we want to make them fast for you. So I'm going to switch over to my views. I'll use the keyboard for this one. I'm sitting in my views, and we'll say for the index view, here is the template. I want to go to the template. Well, maybe I've turned off the project window. And now I'd have to go do, and I'd have to remember all the, and it's got the funky Django structure, magic structure underneath the app and stuff like that. Or I could just click here, and it will jump us to the template. And if I want to go back to the view, it tells me where this is referenced, and I can go back to the view. If I want something that doesn't involve the mouse, I can go over to this. It looks like a string, but it's a symbol, and I can navigate to it, and I can use navigate back to go back to where I was. All right, so that's navigate view to template. Autocomplete template name in views. So I'm sitting here typing, and I'm like, Is it index? Did I change my mind about that? Was it something else? What could, oh, autocomplete. Yay. Thank you, PyCharm, for knowing that it's actually in polls, templates, polls, index.html. It knew what that structure was. We can autocomplete not just that part, but that part too. Because we know what the installed apps are, because we have special support for Django projects. Refactor rename on an app. For this one, I'll make it a little more clear by bringing up the project tool window. This is an app that's registered in the site, a Django app. Let's say I want to change it to my polls, because I've got my site, and I think my site, my polls, that makes sense. But my goodness, where are all the places that it might be mentioned? It's even mentioned in strings, which are these sort of symbol-y things. Am I going to remember in the tests? Am I going to remember everywhere that I change it? I'll just leave it the way it is. No, clean up on aisle 5. Janitor, let the IDE do the janitorial work for you. Click here, refactor, rename, call it my polls. Say enter, and it goes and gets the changes. It didn't have to change this because that's actually under here. Probably something that we should work on changing. What changed? Look at all these files that changed because they are imports for to polls. I do all that. I then decide, oh my God, I made a big mistake. Will undo, put me back the way I was. Undo will put me back the way it was. I encourage those of you that are really heavy duty workhorses in Django that also use PyCharm Professional, give us some suggestions on refactorings that will do a lot of the cleanup on aisle 5 for you. I just gave one that did a lot, but not everything. I'll pose a question to Slack. Should we have, when we renamed this to my polls, should we have renamed that to my polls and then thus that to my polls? Give your answers over in Slack. I'll be interested to see what you say. Meta classes in models. So I'm going to go back to my choice model. Django configures your models with these classes named meta, which are not Python meta classes, but it's a convention. And so I say class meta, and then I actually get autocomplete on things in here. For example, managed is a thing that applies to the thing that I'm meta-ing, model, so I can autocomplete. And we know the schema for that. Do we? Anyway, I can type false to override the default value on that. There are other things that can be auto-completed for these configuration classes as well. Using Everitt in templates, I'm going to go back to my index.html. I talked about Everitt, this kind of speed completion thing to generate trees of HTML. Yeah, I'm an explicit guy too, but this is answering Jeremy. Later, sometime later this year, I'm going to talk about configuration, convention versus configuration. A lot of these systems, Hugo, that involve magically named things put in magical places. And when you break the rules, you are just screwed at finding out what's wrong. I'm a pyramid person, so I believe more in configuration that can actually help you. I'm also a believer in static typing in MyPy and stuff, so that you know immediately that something went wrong. Again, trying to throw some stuff out that will get me some hate mail in Slack. All right, using Everitt in templates. For example, let's say under the link, I want to put a heading with a particular class. Shift enter to make a new line, and I would say h1.subtitle, and I hit tab, and it generates the markup for me. The Everitt system is really rich and can generate a UL with 10 LIs with the first one having a certain class. It's pretty daggone cool. Live templates. We have two kinds of ways to automate repetitive generation of Python or HTML or Django templates or stuff. One's called live templates. There's another thing called postfix completion, which I should do a series of tips on. I'll stick to live templates for now. For example, if after this if, let's say I wanted to do a Django template block, I wanted PyCharm to automate the generation of that block, I'll do Command J to bring up the live templates, and I'll start typing block. Could have stopped there. Could have stopped there. I'll hit enter, and it will go into kind of placeholder mode where I can type things, and it will go to the next thing until I finish. And then it generates the curly bracket percent, end block, all that other kind of stuff. What drives that? We have in settings, we have live templates. If I go to the currently installed live templates, I have the out-of-the-box live templates. They're organized kind of by group. And so Django has its own series of live templates. This is the one that I used. This is the definition of it. And so these are the things that I need to type in order to do it. And do I want to automate my own things? Sure, why not? I will create my own live templates, put it in a group, and put all those placeholders and generate my chunks of things. Pyramid plus Emacs. All right, I'll go tell Chris McDonough you said that. Debugging Django templates. This is one of those things that is just revolutionary when you see it the first time. So much logic goes into templates. So much failure possibilities go into templates. And templates are this parallel universe that is sort of Python, but not really. And just because you know one thing doesn't mean you know another thing, and you can fail in surprise, or you get into a mode where you can't understand what's going on in a template. You need to poke around. Print won't help you. You need a debugger. So for example, I want to stop execution when I get to this 4 and see what this thing is about. Well, the truth is PyCharm will actually help you see what this thing is about. It knows the context object name. This thing is latest question list, but that's beside the point. I'm stuck here. I need help. What I'm going to do is put a breakpoint, and I'm going to run Django, but I'm going to run it under the debugger. I will note, I'm going to do the next tip now to show what's happening here. This run configuration that I created, I set it to automatically bring up the browser at this URL, which means it's going to, the debugger is going to do something that triggers a request, and then the request will stop at this point. So that's why this is happening. So I'm going to bring up the debugger. I'm going to run this. I'm going to run Django, the Django server. I'll also mention that. This is a run configuration of type. Oh, get out of the way. It's a run configuration of type. Oh, you're in the way, Zoom. A run configuration of type Django server. That's what this little curly thing is here. So we get some extra things happening, like a custom set of configuration things. So I'm going to run this under the debugger. It's going to fire up, and a little bit quickly, we issued this, we brought up a browser, we issued this request, and PyCharm stopped execution on that line in the debugger. I see everything that's in scope at that line in the debugger. We've gone past this if, so this exists. What is it? It's this. And we see everything about it, and I can step into it. I can step over it. I'll step over it. Now I get inside that loop, and I can see all this stuff that's happening. I now have a question in scope. and I can see what is going on with the question. I can bring up the console, type things around. I can bring up evaluate expression. I can do conditional. I can step into things. All of the things, mega things that Lisa has in our debugger is available from Django templates. Very helpful. Very mature too. We've been doing this Django template debugging for a long time. Next Django tip, create template from usage. So let's say I'm back in my views, and I will clone this, just speed it up, and I'll say my view, template name, polls, my view.html. And we see that PyCharm is very helpfully telling me, clean up on aisle 5. We have a template that doesn't exist. Thank you, PyCharm, but now I gotta open this and go over this, make a file. Or maybe I'm a little bit smart and I can instead use the activate navigation bar that Paul just told me about and go to templates and blah, 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 blah. Or let the IDE Alt-Enter, I'm gonna hit Alt-Enter, and let it, with our special Django integration, create that template at that location for me. And since I'm under version control, prompt to add it to Git. Very helpful. Oh, and associate it with that view. Navigate to URL patterns. So let's say I'm in urls.py, and I'll start at the top. This is here under my site. I've got all those things configured my site, including my URL comp stuff. And I want to see what's going on with this. And we treat these things as symbols. So I can click on it, Command B, go to this file that has those in it. And for detail, I can click here and go to the view. And then I could click here and go to the template. All by starting at the top with the URL patterns. Autocomplete URL strings in templates. I really like this one, and I'd be interested in some of the, again, the Django hardcore people. Watch this one carefully and see if you have some suggestions for us about other similar things we can do, particularly in templates, but in other places around auto completion. So I'm going to go back to index.html, and I've got this URL helper thing. It takes 2 arguments, a string and then some data. And this string has meaning. It says in the polls app, the detail view, which the detail view expects this piece of data. We treat this as a symbol, not a string, so I can navigate to it. And I can see that it's expecting an integer at that placeholder. And that's what this integer is supposed to be. As I'm typing this though, I can get autocomplete. I can get autocomplete up here as well and up here. Hit enter, accept that default. This is, you may say to yourself, oh, big deal, big whoop. You just saved me 3 taps on the keyboard. What if you got them wrong? Every chance to get an autocomplete is a chance to avoid a typo. And in these magical things with these magical strings, you might not discover that typo for a long time. And yay, PyCharm professional for understanding these magic strings and giving you squigglies when you put a typo. But not every magic string is going to have the magic support needed. So let the IDE help you on autocompleting things. And then the last one, type information about inferred models. I'll go back to views. This is a cool one. This is for Andre Vlasovsky, who participates in Python type hinting and educates me a lot on Python typing. Here is vote, which is related to one of the, oh, it's a few. Okay. So I am returning an HTTP response redirect. After you vote, vote goes to here, does the work for capturing the vote, then redirects you somewhere. It needs to get the question that you're voting on based on the information coming in. It gets that based on this function, get object or 404. What is this doing? Let's go take a look. What is the type of the thing returned by this? Well, it's kind of hard because this query set.get thing, splat args, KW, what is it going to return? Who knows what it's going to return? There's no Python type hinting up here to tell you the kind of thing that's going to return. PyCharm, though, knows this function is going to return one of these things. One of the first things. How do I know that PyCharm knows that? I'm going to hover over this, and it's going to tell me that question has a type of question. I could command hover on it and get just the inferred type information. Same thing here. Question.choice_set.get is going to return something. This not get, who knows what it's going to return? This is going off into the ORM and stuff like that. PyCharm knows that this is going to be a choice. And some of this stuff that we do applies over in templates as well. You can command hover over some symbols in the template and find out a little bit of information, possibly do some navigation on it. All stuff that we could improve over time. All right, that closes out the Django tips and tricks part. Next up, we will be doing stuff from the TDD section. I've put in extra time on the pacing on this to take questions and things like that. So feel free to give any questions or even any suggestions if you have them. Anything that we could do better with our IDE support. And Mary Beth, do you think it's worth taking a short break or just continuing? All right, Brandon. Interesting. Brandon, you willing to go off mute and talk? On this one, I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about what you think on this. Our tox support lets you pretty easily switch between interpreters, but that might not move into the console the way that you're interested in.
Yeah, am I live? Can you hear me?
Yep. Yeah, good. Oh, cool.
Okay. Yeah, so nowadays I end up working more in like microservice frameworks. So I have multiple projects open in a window at one time. And so I have, 5 or 6 or 7 different little Flask microservices in my project. And sometimes I want to switch my interpreter that I can drop down into in Python console, but then I have to go up to settings and set it.
All right.
And come back. I would like to just be able to switch between any of my active interpreters for any of my active projects.
Can you still see my screen?
Yeah.
How about that?
Right. And so
So being able to switch between interpreters using something like that, would that be helpful?
Yeah, I mean, anything, or even if I right click the Python console, you know, because that's a little different than what my active interpreter is. Because even if you switch that, the Python console tab doesn't follow.
It follows you would have to restart the console, but it would follow. This is reassigning the project interpreter. And so the console follows the project interpreter.
So I don't want to reassign the project interpreter because assign interpreters, I have virtual environments for every project. So they're all separate little projects. So I have all those set already as project interpreters. I don't want to actually change the project interpreter. I want to be able to change which project interpreter is active.
Got it. It's interesting you bring that up because we've been getting started a little bit with poetry support. And poetry makes it easier to, for one thing, use a different interpreter or use a different environment, I should say, which could also mean different interpreter. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, if I could get Ernst or one of the other PyCharm folks to follow up with you in Slack and see if we can find an existing ticket that accurately maps to the feature you're describing. And if not, let's create a new ticket.
Yeah, there is one.
Okay.
I've upvoted it and everything.
All right. Can you paste it in Slack?
Yeah, if I can find it real quick.
All right, cool. Would you be willing, if poetry made this easier, would you be willing to move to poetry?
I'm ignorant of what poetry is and what that would require, but probably.
I'm actually happy you said that because on the poetry ticket, poetry is like pipenv and it's like virtualenv. It's a different system.
Okay, so I'll use pipenv.
What's that?
I use pipenv right now.
Then I think pipenv also has a way to say via the pipenv command, execute this, but in this environment. Does it?
Maybe.
All right. So we should follow up about that because in our work to engage with poetry, we're refactoring the way we're doing some of these things so that the way you do it in pipenv is the way you do it in poetry is the way you do it in Conda. In this use case of, I don't want to make a permanent decision now and forevermore, this is my project interpreter. It's more like for this, maybe simultaneously, whatever. So paste that ticket in Slack and see if we can follow up with you about it.
All righty.
And thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem. I realize that I'm probably like a big edge case.
Well, I mean, you said the magic word of microservices, right?
Yeah, I did.
The container, no pun intended, in which every feature could be shoved. All right, let's see. Good. And oh, Andre's replying. Thank you, Andre. All right, Brandon, take it up with Andre. He really knows what he's talking about on this. Okay, I will continue, or if anybody else has any other questions, we'll take a quick pause and see if we get some more questions before going on to this next section. As an FYI, for this next section, we are going to be switching over to the material in this tutorial that is listed here. It's also in the gist that I sent. All right, I think that's it, so we will continue. We're going to talk about testing. We're going to talk about PyTest, and we're going to talk about what Brian Ocken calls PyCharm as a visual UI for testing. In particular, I would like to get more people involved in testing by showing them the rhythm of testing that you can get into by having a visual UI and try to make it fun and valuable, to make it more fun and more valuable to do your stuff while testing than to do your stuff without testing. During this tutorial, we're going to build a little bit of an application, and it's going to be maybe 60% teaching you about PyTest. Most of you may already know it, but 40% about using this visual UI on PyTest called PyCharm to drive testing, to make you more productive, and to put to work a lot of those tips that we just showed. So the first thing we're going to do is this project setup step. I'm going to switch back over to PyCharm. In this case, I'm switching to PyCharm Community Edition. I'm going to create a project from scratch, explain a controversial decision that I made in the tutorial and why I'm doing it, and then we will pick up steam and get into testing a little bit. So I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to call this Lax League because that's the topic that we're working on. I have one from the tutorial that I wrote. It's going to be based on Python 3.8 because I use some time pending things. And I will create this project. PyCharm will open a new window. It will create a virtual environment using Python 3's bundled virtual M support. Then it will update some indices, and I've got a new project. Then we get to the controversial part. And I'll go back to the page and explain this controversial part. It's about Python packaging. And instead of just showing you an app with some code on your disk and tests that work against it that can't be shared with anybody else, I'm going to follow the PyTest best practices about putting your tests outside of your code, putting your test in something under SRC instead of directly in your content root of your project root. In other words, we're going to do it a little bit the hard way. So we're going to, I'll cut and paste this. No, I'll do the full typing to show PyCharm. We're going to make a setup.py and turn this into a Python package using setup.py. Other ways to do it. This hard way is not a requirement for PyCharm at all. This is a PyTest best practice to keep your tests separated from your code and to make sure when somebody installs your package on another system, they get what you expect. And that's a point I should make a little bit better in the text. This is about repeatability. Sure, it works in your environment. Who knows what's in your environment? Can somebody else use it if they clone it from Git? So with this, I'm making a setup.py, hand wavy future pyproject.toml, better things, blah, blah, blah. We don't live in that future completely yet. So I'm going to use the best practices setup.py with the setup function. I'm going to import this from setup tools. I'm going to pass it some arguments. The name of my project is going to be called Lax League. And I'm going to make it easy for people who consume this to put in a little bit of information when installing to say, give me all the dependencies when I'm doing testing. And so this is going to be a dictionary where the key of tests equals a sequence of a list of PyTest. Then I'm going to do these two things that involve putting my code under SRC instead of a name that is exactly the same as the name of my project. The way to do that is to say my packages for this are actually going to be found using find packages from setup tools. And the location is in SRC. Then last, I'm going to say packages under dir equals dict. Now I got to do the constructor. Single quotes. Okay, with these in place, I'm going to have what Python considers a package, which can be shared with other people. And when they install it, it's going to say, this is a package named Lax League. If you want my tests, when you install it, tell me. And these are the things that will go with tests. And my source code is under SRC. Now, when I want to install it locally to get going with this, I'm going to go to the terminal and I'm going to follow PyTest best practices to do an editable install with the extras of tests, and it will go get everything needed for tests. I said where did I said test right there. I've got to have some straight typo. All right, I have some straight typo. It will go out and do all of these things. Oh, because I haven't created source yet. All right. I can get rid of that. What this step does is it creates this egg info thing that is Python's way of signifying that I've got a local package, an egg. As I mentioned in the write-up, apologies for all of this crap. Python has a sorted history. This isn't a PyCharm thing. It's kind of a PyTest thing, but it's more a Python thing. This is crappy. It is, though, getting better. So now that we have a local package, let's go make some code. In here, I'm going to make a file called player.py. It's going to have a class player that does nothing right now. Let me get rid of that. And I'm going to set up my PyCharm project to say PyTest is my test runner. So I'm going to go, if I opened a project that already had PyTest installed, we would have detected this. Since I installed PyTest after the fact, I have to go and do this manually through tools, Python integrated tools. In this preference, we want to set the default test runner so that PyCharm will run PyTest for us using this visual UI. And then with that in place, I've got my directory structure. I need one more thing. PyTest wants your tests stored outside of your source. So I'm going to create a new directory called tests. And is that right? Yeah, good. My project has a virtual environment. It has my source code and it has the test directory. And so I'm all set up. And I will go on to actually writing a test, and then I will take some questions on that. I'm going to write a test to see if my player class works correctly. Well, it's not doing anything right now, but TDD, test-driven development, is about writing your tests before you write your implementation. So we might as well go ahead and start writing a test. PyCharm can help you generate the test, which is actually kind of convenient because you get distracted for leaving what you're doing, going over to tests, creating a new file, putting something in it, and then going back to where you were, and things have to be named correctly. Instead, I'm going to do navigate to test, this thing, Shift Command T, and it sees based on file naming, the convention would be test under player in the tests directory. There is no file named test under player.py in the test directory. So this window says, I can't navigate to the test for this code because it doesn't exist yet. Do you want me to create it for you? Yes, I want you to create it for me. Clean up on aisle 5. I can re-choose the target directory, but it's good. Keep it. I can choose the file name. That's good. Keep it. I can choose what the name of the generated thing in there should be. I'll say OK to all the defaults. And it writes kind of a PyTest compliant test under player, that has a single assertion, and it's in the tests directory with a name that helps PyTest associate it with the thing that it's testing. So all good. We've obeyed the PyTest protocol for test discovery. So everything knows how to find, everything needs to start with test under, and then PyTest will run it. We're going to run the test using this visual UI. What does that mean? I can right click and choose this, and it will run everything in this file under PyTest. I could click here and run just one test under PyTest. I'll do the former. I'll run everything, and it fails. Of course it fails because this is false. This is our tool window for testing. Doesn't really matter too much if it's PyTest or unit test or nose or anything like that. All kind of looks the same. In fact, if it was JavaScript, it would look pretty similar to this. Tests on the left, whatever test you've selected on the right, information about all of your tests here, lots of knobs to do anything to configure your test running. I want to change this to pass. And so I'm going to change this to true. I'm going to rerun this test. The fastest way to rerun it is similar things that we saw in the tests in the 42 tips. Rerun the last thing. The last thing was that run configuration. That's the one that's currently selected. That's the thing we want to run. So Control R will rerun our test, and it passes. I can put it back, rerun it. It fails. I can put it back, rerun it, and it succeeds. We're getting into the flow of writing and running tests. Lots of different ways to run your tests. I showed you 2. You can run everything in this file by clicking in the context menu. You can run just one test through this. You can run everything in a directory under here by clicking on the directory, or run everything by right-clicking on this. We will do this one in a moment. All right, so we're clicking along. What I usually do first is I kind of trick myself into getting into TDD mode by writing a test that doesn't do too much. It just constructs an instance. Waiting for it, yeah. So a lot of my test files all start with test under construction. I want to construct the instance of player. I haven't imported it yet. Guess who can help? Guess who can help? PyCharm can help. Control space space. It finds the thing I'm looking for, completes it for me, and does the import. And now when I do create an instance, construction with the parens, now I rerun my tests, and my tests pass. I am successfully able to construct an instance of player under test. And I will, let's see. Yep, I reran it. Our test still pass. We have one test right now that's running and passing. I will pause there and see if anybody has any questions about that whole setup.py thing, the editable install thing, or writing our first test.
I'm not seeing any in Slido, but feel free to join into the gallery and ask your questions, or put them in Slido or Slack, and we'll get them over to Paul.
I would love to hear people talk on this part, especially. And give me suggestions on this mission of bringing testing to the masses as we go along and show a kind of visual way. So if anybody has any suggestions.
In the Zoom here, you should be able to unmute yourself and share your video if you'd like.
All right, I will continue. We're going to we're going to go to the next step in this, which is getting into the TDD flow, which is kind of the mode I get into when I'm doing development. So what we want to do in this step is we want to add a feature. Players have parents, or more specifically, guardians. And we're going to start implementing guardians and try and get into the process of doing it in test-driven development. So I'm going to go back to my source, and I'm going to create a new file called Guardian. Going to make it a class, Guardian. I'm going to put a doc string so that people working on this project can do that F1 thing that we talked about in 42 tips. They can discover a little bit about the meaning of something without having to go to it. So I'll say a guardian or parent of a player in the league. And I will also do a pass for now. I'll do the same thing to generate a test. Accept the defaults. And I will go ahead and make this into a construction test. I will make an instance, generate the import, and I will run this, and we pass. So a little bit of a victory, not a major victory. Let's get more into the TDD flow. I talked about this a little bit in 42 tips. For me, this means split vertically, turn off tabs, turn off all the Chrome, split vertically with the code on the left, turn off the project tool window, code on the left, test on the right, test runner output at the bottom. And then one more thing that's a little bit controversial. This is my preference. Doesn't have to be yours. That whole thing about auto running. So if I click here, toggle auto test, I'm turning on auto test. When I run now, as I type, I sit and wait for 3 seconds, and it will automatically run the test, and the test will fail. I put it back, and the test will pass. And actually what I want to do is run all of my tests. So I'm going to close, I'll close this one. I'll go up to my test folder and run all of my tests. So this will run 2 tests, and I'm going to put that into auto run mode. So if I break something in one, but I'm not running the tests in the other, that's bad. I want to run all of my tests. They run so fast, I might as well run them all the time. And don't forget, you don't have to save, like here, if I type false, I don't have to now save my code in order for PyCharm to run it. It's got this virtual file system thingy where it's like always saving for you, which also drives that local history thing. Now, the Guardian isn't doing anything right now. I got to get into implementation. So I want a class that will, oh, that's my reminder to show the cool thing. Andre's thing. I will set the reminder to go off a little bit later. Timer, 18 minutes from now. See how we did. Is that right? No, I'll make it a little bit longer than that. Okay, I need to do the implementation. Well, I could go over to my class and go ahead and start implementing a constructor that you pass it a first name and a last name, and it stores on the instance and blah, blah, blah. But I want to do this in TDD mode. So what I'm going to do in TDD mode is I'm going to get rid of this line. I'm going to say G equals Guardian. I'm going to pass it a first name of Mary and a last name of Jones. Now, I'm going to wait 3 seconds, and my test's going to fail. But I didn't have to wait 3 seconds. I didn't have to run my tests. I didn't even have to write my test. I failed faster because my IDE gave me warning information about an unexpected argument. This idea of failing faster, failing in a more clear way, letting your tools help you fail and help you correct is an important part for me of TDD flow, fail faster. So with this failing, of course it's breaking because I haven't done my implementation. I need to switch over here and make a constructor. The IDE can help me on that. And nope, I want to say first under name. Right, and I'm going to add a field. First number, name the guardian. And I'm going to say first under name is first under name. That's good. I'm going to say last under name, same routine, accept it. I'm going to swap the order of this just for good housekeeping. And now my test passed because I did the implementation. Except it's not really testing anything. It's just constructing the instance. So now I want to say assert autocomplete g.first under name autocomplete double equal Mary. And my test passes. My test passes, but I have something that's a little bit of a peeve. In the world of Python testing, not PyTest, all testing, there's this debate about expected versus actual, which should be on the left, which should be on the right. I have actual equals expected. There's like I explain in the write-up, there's a big argument about this. And Guido said, I don't care about this. This is dumb. But Kent Beck, who's kind of important when it comes to testing, does, and I believe Brian Ocken does as well. And I believe it should be expected equals actual. So the opposite of that. So what we're going to do in order to tell PyCharm that we've got a style, we want to use it, we're going to create a new file at the root called pytest.ini to configure PyTest. And we're going to say that. And the reason this matters is, let me go back to the test. I'll do an assert, and I'll say expected equals actual. And let you see what PyCharm does. Because I did the flipping, let me go back to that flipping thing. Expected actual does not equal actual expected. It expected the actual to be on the left and the expected to be on the right. Let's confirm that. I'll have PyCharm do the flipping for me. I'll wait 3 seconds, and expected and actual are correct. Except this one is backwards. No, actually it wasn't that one. Expected of expected does not equal actual of actual. So that is correct. Actual on the left, expected on the right. I go and I put in my preference. Now it's going to be messed up on expected actual, actual expected. And I will do the flipping. Now we're in that style of Kent Beck where expected is on the left, actual is on the right. I get rid of this. And I want to flip these. So expected, Mary, equals actual. I'll do another line, assert. I really got to find a better way to explain this. So now I'm actually testing my implementation. The command to do the flipping is like the uber mega awesome PyCharm thingy that will help you, Alt-Enter. Alt-Enter is like the entry point to all the places where PyCharm can help you. It's also kind of like this thing. So we will prompt you on this. The fact that you, Caleb, asked that question is evidence to us that we have all this awesomeness that people don't even know about because they have to do something to know about it. what we're working on in future releases is to surface some of this power in a context sensitive way, so that maybe we knew there was a refactoring and we put some little gutter icon over here to prompt you on that. Yes, Angular, you can't live without it, can you? It's like writing Java. Whew. I say that as someone who likes TypeScript, but same kind of thing. I should ask you, Jeremy, do you actually like Angular? I presume you're talking about modern Angular and TypeScript, not old Angular JS. Jeremy, follow up with me about that. I've got something to ask you about. All right. Let's see. A question about the PEP 8 thing. Presumably that question is whether the expected and actual order is a PEP 8 thing. It isn't. In fact, in the thing that I linked to where Guido didn't designate a winner, this was just a discussion in Python dev. It wasn't even in a PEP. There are several problems with the terminology. So feel free to not care about this, but PyCharm by default will put actual over here and expected on the right. All right. Someone else likes Angular. Interesting. How would you feel about, okay, anyway, we'll talk separately about that. Okay, onward. We've gotten it into a good mode. We've written tests that confirm our implementation is correct. We are in TDD mode. Woohoo! Let's see some other ways that we can work productively. We're going to do a refactoring, and we're going to convert this from a normal dunder init to a data class. Why? Because Paul loves data classes, but also to show we can refactor with ease and with confidence because we have a test. I've got my code on the left. I've got my test on the right. I've got my test runner on the bottom in auto run mode. I can do this. All right, so start a new line above. I'm going to make a data class. This is a Python 3.7 thing. There's a backport to Python 3.6. And I'm going to let it generate the, I'll do Alt-Enter to show. Alt-Enter, import this name from data classes, not adders. And now this is a data class. And what I will do is replace the constructor with first under name str, last under name str, and let data classes handle the construction of my instance for me. My tests pass because it's the same. You pass it arguments, you get back an instance. Data class just made some of the boilerplate for that go away, which is good. So now we have refactored with confidence. I want to refactor with confidence on player and make it a data class. The problem is test under player doesn't pass any arguments. So we need to kind of make it fail and then do our implementation. We'll say P equals player Tatiana Jones. And we failed faster because our IDE warned us. Now my tests will run, they'll fail. I will go ahead and put the rest of this and assert, and I'm now in expected versus actual. So the expected is Tatiana equals P dot, and I'm not going to get autocomplete because I don't have anything in my implementation yet. And I'll say assert Jones equals P dot, and I'm not going to get autocomplete because I don't have anything in my implementation yet. Go now over to my implementation, and I will enter, make a new line, data class, nope, generate the import, and screw it, I will go back over to here, copy these two lines, also give a doc string. Why does the doc string help? If I'm over in my test, I'm like, what is this thing? I mouse over it. I see some information in this little pop-up thing. A player in the league. It's a data class. Cool. And my test passed, which means that I did TDD. I wrote a failing test on the right. I switched over to the left to my implementation, made my implementation pass. Just in case I broke something, my tests are in auto run so that all of my tests were running the whole time. Can PyCharm generate some boilerplate paste on your tests? You say you don't get autocomplete with it. That would be interesting. So I think what you're saying is like here, when it was broken, because I hadn't done anything, you're saying maybe we could Alt-Enter and get a pop-up that said, do you want me to construct an old style class, a data class, or something like that, and provide some arguments? And then it would do a little red box over here for the first one. Maybe it detects that that's a string, and so it writes the type hint for you, goes on to the next one until you've completed all the arguments. Did I say that right, Jeremy? It's pretty badass. Andre. Paging, Andre, listen. It's great being an advocate because I don't have to actually follow through on any of this stuff. All right, now, more of the implementation. We have a player, we have guardians. We don't have any connection between players and guardians. Let's implement that connection, but let's do it with failing tests. So I'm over in my tests for player. I'll confirm that, test under player. I'm going to write a new test, add under guardian. So test, add under guardian. And I'm going to make an instance of a guardian. Got to import it. Thank you, PyCharm. Mary Jones. And I'm going to make a player, and I will copy this. Actually, delete it. No, not that. I'll delete this and then move it down. Then I will do the failing part. I will say p.add under guardian, no autocomplete because it doesn't exist yet. I'm going to add that guardian. Then I'm going to assert that I expect to get a list of guardians back when I get p.guardians. When I access p.guardians, I'm getting a list, and it's only going to have one guardian in it right now, the one that I just added. Obviously, this all fails. So let's go implement this. Let's go implement this. The first thing I need is a list of guardians. Second thing I need is that method to add a guardian. This is a data class. So the way I will do this with a data class is I will say guardians will be, pro tip, I'm about to make a slight error. It'll work, but it's not correct. We'll fix it later. It's going to be a list, and by default, it's going to be a field with a default factory of list. Because this is mutable and it shouldn't be an argument. Now I'm going to be able to do add under guardian, self.guardians.append guardian. Wait 3 seconds and it runs. And my test pass. Let's say though, I'm going to do this really fast so that you'll, within 3 seconds, so you see the effect. I'm going to make a mistake here that's going to generate a traceback down here, and I'm going to show how the IDE can jump to errors. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to jump to something else. And down here, I get an error, a traceback. It reported in PyTest that says there's an error, and the error is in player.py on line 13. And all I got to do is click on it. PyCharm will open the file if needed with the cursor on the line that has the error. And you're like, oh yeah, duh. Of course it's got an error. It's even warning me about that. How dumb am I? Thank you, PyCharm. So PyCharm goes off, fixes it. We get the help on that. I want to take a little bit of time to talk about this idea of fail faster before going and fixing that mistake I was talking about. You could do nothing and ship the damn thing, also known as JavaScript programming, and let your customers do your debugging and testing in production. You could write tests and hope that you write enough tests to capture all the failures. You could write tests and write code with type hints, these Python 3.6 and above type hints, and let a tool like MyPy run and catch your problems even before you write a test. You can even go one step further and sit in an IDE, one of the IDEs in the world of Python, that will prompt you, and you don't have to run a separate step. It will immediately tell you you made a mistake. I feel like TDD is great because you fail faster. I feel like type hints are great because you fail faster. I feel like the combination of TDD and type hinting in Python are a wonderful combination. Even if you're the only one working on the project, it helps you fail faster. So I'm a big believer in that. Let's go fix our mistake. Guardians, you can't really use list because a list of what? Well, it's a list of guardians. So we need to say a list and get the symbol list from the typing package so that it's a generic type. And I can modify the generic type and say, it's a list of guardian. No. What did I mistype that? That's what I get. See, don't do the typing. Let the tool do the typing for you. So now it's a list of guardian. I've done some typing on this. In Python 3.9, we won't have to do this separate import of lists. The regular list will be a generic. And I can also say that this is a guardian. And so how does this help? What if I accidentally did this? PyCharm or MyPy or any of the type checkers will tell you you failed the contract because you were supposed to pass in a guardian, not a player. You passed in a player. And that's pretty cool. You don't have to go full Java and do complete type checking. You can do just a little and get a lot of the benefit. And Randy's right. I'm going to be really interested to see in the tutorial that's after this. That's the one I'm going to go to see about some of these best practices about testing. Let's see, Randy, if you believe in type hinting. Okay, onward. We now have guardians that can be added to players. We failed faster. We've got our final version of this. I will go through a couple more and show some more features and speed up a little bit and then show the sneaky peek thing at the end. Sometimes I'm doing TDD, I write a test, it's failing. I want it out of the way temporarily because I got some stuff to do and I don't want a failing test. So let's say that I'm adding a feature where we can add multiple guardians rather than one guardian. And it's failing because I haven't implemented it yet. PyCharm tells me I haven't implemented it. And it fails. Well, I could comment it out, but then I'll commit it, and I'll forget about it. Instead, I can use PyTest marker of PyTest, generate the import, mark, skip, and it will skip this test. It will PyCharm will tell me I ignored one test and ran the other three. If I wanted to, I could put in a reason of have not implemented. You get a little bit more information or share some information with others in my project about why this was skipped. And then I can come over and do the implementation. I'll type it since this will be fun and fast. Let's see, I will do even faster. I will duplicate this block. And I'll say guardians. And I will say guardians are a list of guardian. And I'm going to do extend because I'm handed a list. I want to combine it with an existing list. And I'm going to use extend. Now that I have this working, I can remove that. I'll have a unused import. I'll clean up my imports, my test paths, and I added a new test that implemented this feature. Do a little bit of typing cleanup. I've got this where I'm passing a list, but maybe it should be a tuple because it's immutable. There's no reason to pass something mutable. PyCharm will actually help me on this. Convert to tuple. And my test pass, great, except okay, I guess I should have done it that way. Thank you. Except I get a type error reported. You handed me a list. No, you handed me a tuple. I was expecting a list. Well, we should be liberal in what we accept, Postal's law, and strict in what we return. I shouldn't have to always get a list. What I should do is an iterable from typing. And I don't, yeah, I got my up there. And now my type hint problem went away because I can accept a list, a set, a tuple, whatever. One more feature, primary guardian. I will, let's see, cut and paste. We will have this kind of hand wavy thing that the first person added is the primary guardian. And it all looks kind of the same, but what we want is a new implementation that says, when you ask for primary guardian, we're going to return to you the first guardian. And with that in mind, my tests run, but as you probably spot, and we will pick this up later on, there's a flaw in this. What happens if you have no guardians? When you access that, you'll run into a problem. I'm going to go just the next one. I'm going to do the next one and then show the remaining ones because this next one is important from a PyTest perspective. You may have noticed, oh, I've got an XXX in there, crap. You may have noticed that we keep recreating players and guardians over and over in our tests. What you want is to move, okay, there's a school of thought that says, don't worry about it. Don't worry, be crummy. Just tests should be immediately obvious. Don't make them magical. Don't move stuff somewhere else. There's another line of thinking that the test should focus on the thing being tested, move the test setup to something else. In PyTest, fixtures are this facility and mechanism for reusable, configurable bits of stuff that can be pumped into tests. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to make a fixture for player one. I'll do that by getting the decorator for PyTest. And I'll say fixture. By default, the name of the thing it's decorating becomes the name of the fixture. I could change it to have a manually assigned name. This is going to return a player. And I'm going to take this and screw it. I'll just move this up here and return P. Technically, I don't have to do that. PyCharm is smart enough to see the return and infer the type and pass it along. But I like doing this just for the Python type hinting perspective. Functions should specify what they return. Now what I can do is come in here and say player one. You see the autocomplete? This is a cool thing. Fixtures are this magical namespace where stuff can come from places. They can come from a fixture in this file. They can come from a fixture file called comptest.py in this directory or a parent directory, or you can go discover fixtures from packages and things. And we can figure all of that out and we autocomplete it. We can command hover. It will tell us what it is. That's why I was mentioning that I could skip that and we will infer it correctly. I'll go ahead and put it back. And now player one comes from the fixture rather than having to be created in this test. And if I change this to Tatiana XXX, then it fails because the fixture changed the name. And then I would go down and I would put this in player one, and I might refactor rename this to player one and delete this line and go through and do that for the rest. And then what I might do is take this and move it to a comptest.py, put in the imports, go back to here and refactor. And now player one is coming from the comptest.py. PyCharm school support for it. Again, we know what it is and we can navigate to the fixture. Wherever it was discovered, we can navigate to the fixture there. I agree with Caleb. I did mention that about moving stuff out of the test into this magical namespace. Makes it hard to walk up to the test and figure out what the hell's going on. I'm with you on that. I flip-flop between those two things completely. Sometimes I like really overdo it and use fixtures and nesting and overriding fixtures way beyond what I should be doing. Before I skip over to the cool feature, I will show what else is in this tutorial, and then I will take some tests and show the cool feature. We just went over test fixtures. I moved everything to fixtures and shared them between the two tests. I showed debugging during testing, which I'm about to show the cool feature. And then I showed that exception that I mentioned. If I try to get item 0 of an empty list, it'll fail. How do you write a PyTest that will ensure that something fails correctly? You can use this raises context manager and say, when this block runs, it better raise this exception, which I can capture with some name and test the exception value if I want to. So that's the rest of this Visual PyTest tutorial. Any questions before I go on? Feel free to pipe up talking or just type them. Ha, Brandon, I just showed you.
Did I miss it in your speed run?
What's that?
Did I miss it in your speed run there?
Let me come back. So I'm sitting on this fixture, right? This fixture is injected into my test. And as I hover on it, it tells me the file name that it came from. You see that? test.conftest?
Hover.
And I can also Command B and navigate to it.
Yeah, word.
Does that give what you were looking for?
Indeed.
All right, cool. There are a lot more that we do with fixtures that Ilya implemented and did the first set of things and the next set of things. And by the end, there's a lot of cool fixture support. I really need to do a better job of explaining all that stuff. All right, so I'm going to show debugging during testing, but I'm going to cheat. I'm going to show it under last night's PyCharm, which might be today's PyCharm. And I will open the thing I was just sitting on. And that was in, oh, no, where was that? Yeah. All right, come over to this window. Debugging during testing. This is something I was talking about in this step, is so incredibly valuable. you have some problem, you don't know what's going wrong. Print's not going to help you because PyTest is capturing output. Put a breakpoint, run the test under the debugger, and it will stop at the breakpoint. And then you can use all the debugging tips to poke around, to walk around through your code during TDD and figure out what went wrong, to interactively poke around. And that's all pretty cool, except nobody knows about it. And we don't talk enough about it, which is a shame because our debugger is so fast that I personally run all my tests under the debugger, so that when I want to set a breakpoint, I don't have to do some extra step in order to go stop what I'm doing, go to the debugger, come back. No, just run under the debugger all the time. It's plenty fast enough. So let's show that in action. I'm going to get into TDD mode. Oh no, I got to open something first. Let's see. Gordian. Well, I'll do player. And then split vertically. What do you mean no Python interpreter? Yes, the one that is right there. Is this because I'm doing something different? Let me go back to the testing I was on yesterday. I know that works. The project I was using yesterday. All right. So I'm sitting on a test, and I'm going to have something that fails. Nope, it's player one. And when I run this regularly, oh, skip. When I run this regularly, it fails. Index out of range. Sure it does. Guardians are empty. I haven't added a guardian yet. But maybe I'm confused, like what's going on? Okay, I could print and run this, but will I see that print statement anywhere? No, I won't, because output is captured. Well, I can fix that problem, but now I'm putting code, debugging code that I might accidentally check in. Instead, run this under the debugger. And it will run, and it will stop on that line, and I can step into code, and I can evaluate or console or all those other things that are cool. The thing that we added that's really cool is, how about we just say, listen, if you run it under the debugger, whenever there's a failed assertion or a problem, we'll just stop for you. This is the new thing that we added with this cool little inlay pop-up, so that you don't even really have to be looking down here. We will stop unfailures automatically. You don't have to set a breakpoint, and we will tell you what went wrong. And that's coming out either today or tomorrow. And we're open to suggestions about what more we could do. For example, maybe this should be a link that will jump to the error that was raised in the exception.
That is awesome.
It was requested a long time ago. There is a PyCharm plugin from the community that kind of worked, but it's now implemented. And we have lots of ideas about how we could go further on this to surface debugging as a first-class feature that you don't have to think about. It's going to show up when it's needed. Maybe coverage, maybe profiling, whatever other things we can surface. Would love to hear some ideas on it. Let me do a poll. +1 if you do coverage.
That should just be the default in the debugger.
Yeah, right. Well, okay, yeah, exactly.
Please.
Yeah. Yep. And you don't have to think about it, because when we do coverage, we do the little gutter highlighting. So your gutter is highlighted. Why do you have to turn something on to get a color-coded gutter? Of course, there's some implementation details. Coverage is kind of slow. Yeah. If you're running under the debugger, maybe you've opted into a set of assumptions, and you can opt out if you want to. What could we do with this inlay pop-up that Andre's come up with? We don't want too much information, but then again, we don't want people to have to go to this to get more information. Anyway, think it over, get the EAP, play with it, see what you think, see what other ideas, and help us the rest of the year with surfacing some of these capabilities and putting them in the hands of civilians. Please help us on that.
I mean, right there, like at least the line number, and then I guess maybe the short summary out of PyTest. If it's you know, that's just an exception for an index error, but you know, if you had the general PyTest output that gives you more information, the short summary might be helpful in that little window. So you don't have to go.
We have to be careful though. If this inlay gets too big, it'll be noisy and distracting.
Sure.
Maybe there's some little icon that will either pop up on hover or go down and open the panel or whatever.
Yeah, because I mean, sometimes, especially when you have, you know, long PyTest failure output,
Yes.
Scrolling through it to figure out what the heck actually
Tracebacks can be long.
Right. But at least the line number where it actually failed would be probably decently helpful right there.
Sure.
Since I'm right there at the window, I don't have to go down into whatever down at the actual debugger to see which part of it actually failed.
Sure.
Or even
the point about hovering is useful as well. We could reveal more information. We could have this, turn that on or off or whatever.
But that's just great.
This inlay thing is a new thing for us. I believe it's driven by our adoption of the Chromium embedded framework. And so we're going to be sprinkling these kinds of things in lots of different places.
I keep refreshing my toolbox and I don't see 2020.1.2 or 3 or whatever, whichever version.
Yeah, so you'll be looking for, we have 2020.2, the EAP 1 for that came out last week. So you'll be looking for EAP 2 and a number of cool things that are coming out the door.
I'll just keep refreshing it all day.
One thing that went out in EAP 1 is greatly improved GitHub pull request support. So you get a view that lets you look at everything in the pull request and engage with it. All right, I have 1 minute left. So I'll be sticking around afterwards. What's that?
I kick you out of here.
Yeah. 1 minute left. Thank you everyone for sticking to the end. I'll be around for the next 2 days in Slack. Please give me suggestions on how to do a better job on this in the future, on other things that we should be talking about, any ideas you have for PyCharm. Thank you again. Thank you, Mary Beth, for being the host, and to the 60s for making this awesome thing happen.